The Outer Side is proudly supported by Tie Gear. Head to www.tiegear.com to explore the wide range of high-quality camping essentials, including guy ropes, screw-in tent pegs, tie-downs, and heaps more. Tie Gear. Adventure secured. Dog and Gun Coffee. Check out www.dogandguncoffee.com to grab yourself some bloody good coffee ready for adventure. G'day and welcome to The Outer Side. I'm Tony, and in this episode I'm joined by Mark Banasiak from the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party. Welcome to the show, mate.
Thank you. Welcome to the madhouse that is Parliament House.
Yeah, this is a little different. So I normally try and shoot these episodes outside wherever possible, but when you suggested that we could shoot here, I thought that was an opportunity I couldn't pass up.
Yeah, more than happy to have you guys here.
Yeah, it's really interesting because only a few short months ago I'd never been here before, and now I think this is the third or fourth time I've been here in a number of months. So it's amazing how things change. But mate, it's really good that you've dedicated the time to sit down and talk to me. I know a lot of my audience is really focused on particularly public land access issues. For the four-wheel drive community, for hunting, for fishing, for pretty much any outdoor recreation. And I know that's something that your party's been, really active in for a very long time. So it's great to get, I guess, a different perspective on it.
Yep.
So before we get into that, so you're a member of the Legislative Council. So that's what we call the upper house, right?
Yes.
So how long have you been in politics for? Like, have you been with Shooters for a long time now?
Yeah, look, I guess in terms of being a politician, I've been in Parliament for about 6.5 years, but in terms of being involved in the party, I probably would say it's probably close to 18 years now I've been involved. Started in the mailroom, so to speak, handing out how to vote cards for the party, and then it was a case of, you do a good job and you get asked to do another one.
Yep.
And that's sort of how it sort of snowballed. I got asked to then coordinate for my whole local area in terms of coordinating volunteers. So, did a really good job in that and growing. I think it was close to 100 volunteers down in Illawarra volunteering for the party during election times, and then got asked to come onto the committee, and then got asked to be the chair, and then probably about 3 months after that got asked to run for state parliament. So technically I'm the shortest chair in party history because I got elected and then was told, no, you can't be chair at the same time. So it's been a bit of a whirlwind journey, but fairly enjoyable. Yeah, right. So before you got into politics, have you been involved in the outdoors, throughout your life? Is it something that came later? What was your sort of pathway into, I guess, your passion for the outdoors? Yeah, look, I think it started growing up as a kid. Like, my grandfather was a mad keen fisherman, and sort of got my father into it and me into it at a very early age. So we're always sort of heading down to Gerringong where he lived and going down to Boat Harbour and just throwing a line out and or going out on the boat on Shoalhaven and just prawning on the lake. Down at Lake Illawarra, it was mainly centred around fishing at that time, because that's what my family was sort of into. And then I guess when I had a bit of a break from it, because I was heavily involved in soccer and at the point where I was training 4 or 5 days a week for that, and ended up playing in the National Youth League like in 1999, and then did the whole injury, blow the ACL out, and that was sort of the end of that. And moping around the house, and my brother-in-law was right into his shooting and hunting, and he said, he'd always been bugging me to go, why don't you come out hunting and shooting? And my wife was like, no, I don't want him to get into it.
Oh, really?
And then she eventually just said, just get rid of him. He's
like a bear with a sore head.
He's doing me head in. He's moping around the house. He can't, he can't play soccer anymore. Just get him out, take him away, and that was the end of it. I've just sort of been involved in the shooting and hunting side of things, and then obviously from that it's a natural progression. Every shooter or hunter owns a 4-wheel drive, and it sort of just goes hand in hand. So it's just that natural progression into the broader outdoor recreation.
It's funny how it works, eh? And I think lately it's been really apparent to me. Like, I'm a fisho, a hunter, and a 4-wheel driver, and then the more I start talking to people, there's crossover everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Hikers are maybe a different breed. Sometimes they hike and that's all they do, and everything else is evil. But definitely in that sort of outdoor recreation community, it's very rare, I think, that someone just does one thing, right?
Yeah. But look, I've got a huge respect for those people, those hunters that just throw on a backpack and just go for miles. Hardcore. Like, it's not me.
Yeah, it's not me either.
No, but huge respect.
Armed bushwalking I can deal with.
Yeah.
Like those multi-day pack hunt hikes, I think are just hectic, eh? Like,
yeah, well, look, my fitness levels aren't what they used to be when I was training 5 days a week.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's not for me at the moment.
I've got some mates in New Zealand that do a lot of like high country alpine hunting, and man, they're like, you should come over here. I'm like, I would die. I would have a heart attack if I tried to walk up a friggin' mountain carrying a pack. Like,
I'm the same.
Yeah, interesting. So what were you doing? Obviously you were doing football, but then before you got into politics, what were you doing for a crust?
High school teacher.
Oh, really?
Yeah, did that for about the same time, about 18 years. So sort of went straight out of school, straight to uni, and then straight back into school.
Would you say dealing with children gave you a good sort of like grounding for politics?
Yeah, look, I say the kids are just as badly behaved, but in this place I can sort of say what I really think about them and not get into trouble or
definitely.
too much trouble.
Yeah.
So yeah, look, it has, and I think it's just having those difficult conversations that you would have as a teacher with parents, with kids, having to be able to get kids to do something that they don't really want to do, which is learn and listen, is a sort of valuable skill here, because you got to try and convince people on the other side of politics that what you're saying is worthwhile and has value. So I think I would say it has prepared me a bit. Nothing prepares you for everything that comes at you in this place. It's the most bizarre workplace I think I'll ever work in. Yeah,
we sat in the session recently when the petition was raised as an MPI, and my mate and I that were here, we walked out here going, that's wild, eh? Like just the conversations, the way the dynamics work within the room. It's a real eye opener, hey?
Yeah. Look, it's some of that is theatre. A lot of the discussions, positive discussions and decisions are made, in hallways, in offices like this, and what you see down there is just, I guess, the execution of those previous held discussions.
Yeah, so, with a couple of curveballs every now and then.
With a couple of curveballs every now and then. Yeah, someone will say something, and a debate that was going quite smoothly turns out to blow out to a couple of hours because someone's rolled a few people up, and
I heard from some of the other guys here, you've had a couple of late night sessions.
Yeah, we have. The longest I've done is probably, I think it was 36 hours with only breaks for breakfast and dinner. That was last Parliament.
How constructive is that?
It's not constructive at all. Nothing sensible gets discussed at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Right?
Yeah. The wheels start coming off, but that's when you're more likely to have someone say something silly, and then it just all goes to shit. So thankfully we don't do a lot of those. Like, we have a rule that you can't debate past 10 o'clock without changing the order of business, so it has to go to a vote to do that, and it's rare. But it's frustrating sometimes when it happens, because you could have had a really quiet day on the Tuesday, and then the government wants to ram through a bill on the Thursday, so he uses that threat of the hard adjournment.
Yeah, right.
To try and ram through a bill, and people then dig their heels in, and that's when you end up debating things till 6 o'clock in the morning, which is not good.
Yeah, not ideal.
No, because then you've got to get up and, either drive home, or start the next sitting day in a couple of hours. It's not conducive to good policy decisions, that's for sure. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I definitely don't claim to be an expert in politics. It's all very new to me, and one of the questions I've been asked a number of times is the difference between the upper house and the lower house. So can you explain the sort of dynamics between that in New South Wales?
Yeah, sure. So lower house, I guess, so they're your local member,
So they're the ones that you would vote for on the small ballot paper when it comes to a state election. And upper house is when you're voting for a party or an individual on the big sort of tablecloth ticket. So a proportion of that vote will guarantee someone a quota or a seat. So generally, most people get elected on a full quota, but there's probably maybe half a dozen people in the upper house that get elected on less than a full quota. It just depends on how many people are on the ballot paper and where those votes land, and where those individual voters' preferences go.
Right.
And our main role in the upper house is to be a house of review in terms of what the lower house is doing. We can pass our own legislation and then send it back down to the lower house, but a lot of our work is committee work, and just essentially reviewing bills that have come up from the lower house.
And then what's the process there? So are you recommending amendments back down to the lower house?
Yeah, that's probably one of the big things. If we don't think the bill should go to a committee to be looked at further, from the public, we'll look at what amendments can be made to improve it if there's any underlying issues, and then we'll debate about those amendments, vote on them, send it back down. They've got to accept those amendments, and then they send us a message and basically say, yeah, we've agreed to your amendments or we haven't. And very rarely, but sometimes bills can pass back and forth between the houses a couple of times before we get an agreement. But it's rare.
And then the lower house is the ones that actually pass the legislation. Is that the way it works?
Yeah, essentially it always goes back to them for the final tit of approval, and then it's sent to the governor for assent, and takes generally around 28 days from the bill passing to be then assented. And assented basically means the bill's it's live. So.
Yeah, okay. And I guess, obviously off the back of the petition that I raised with the upper house, I had many, many questions, and a lot of them I didn't know the answers to, but I guess the most common question that I got was from people outside of New South Wales. And it was, why have you done this at a state level and not a national level? And I explained that, when it comes to national parks, which was the focus of my petition, that it's state-based legislation. Is there any kind of input at a national level in terms of how state national parks are managed, or is it all controlled at a state level?
It's largely all controlled at a state level. I guess where there may be some intersection at a federal level is specific environmental laws around specific species. So when you look at threatened species or threatened habitats, there's always that federal element where it gets the status of whether something's threatened or not gets sent to the feds for review periodically. So that's probably the main intersection, but that doesn't necessarily, have a significant influence on what we're talking about in terms of access. That's more handled at the state level with different management plans and stuff like that. That's where it gets a bit hairy and confusing for people. There's so many layers of that stuff that a lot of people don't realise how many different ways they can have their access restricted.
Well, and I mean, it is confusing because it's in the name, right? Like, it's a national park. It's not a nationally legislated or managed bit of land. Yeah,
that's right. And every state has their own set of national parks. It's a bit of a bizarre setup.
And at a national level, there are some national park areas, correct? Like, there are certain bits of land that are managed at a federal level, is that correct?
I believe so, there is, but I can't say I'm too okay with.
From when I looked at it, I think it was a handful of places around the country, and they're quite specific areas. But when we talk New South Wales national parks, the management and the legislation around that is all done at a state level.
Yeah, that's right. And to be fair, the majority of complaints and concerns I get from people around access is those state-managed areas.
And it's local, right? Like the areas that are convenient or that you've got some sort of affinity with that you like going to. They're the ones you're not going to complain about a national park getting shut in WA if you don't go there, right?
No, that's right. No.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that's been really I guess, challenging for me going through this process is getting people to care about things that maybe they don't use themselves.
Yeah,
And they're like, oh, well, I don't hunt, so I don't care.
welcome to politics.
Yeah, tell me about it.
That's been the biggest frustration for me as well, is that a lot of people don't get engaged until it's right at the pointy end, and it's impacting them directly. And in many cases, it's sort of too late. Like you talk about, oh, it doesn't really affect me because I don't hunt. Like that was a classic example with the blue groper issue I dealt with like last year. A lot of people were going, oh, well, I don't really fish for it. It's a shit-eating fish.
I disagree with that. But
So do I.
Yeah.
I loved it growing up, but there was that mentality. Well, I don't fish for it, so I don't really care. So I'm not going to engage in that democratic process that's available to me. And I won't sign the petition. I won't write to my local member. I won't write to the minister because I don't.
Yeah, it
I don't
doesn't
really
bother
care.
me. Yeah.
And they don't necessarily see the slippery slope. But it wasn't about the fish. It wasn't about that particular track. It was about the process of how it was done to me.
Correct.
That's really the problem.
I got into a number of arguments on the internet about that very thing on a lot of fishing Facebook groups that I'm on, and I am a rock fisho. Now, I don't generally target blue groper. I target drummer, but I tangle with them. They're in the same areas. And I saw a number of people saying, well, I don't care, I don't fish for them anyway. Yeah. And my response to them is, oh, cool, so what about if the same thing happens to kingfish or snapper tomorrow or mulloway? Will you care then?
Yeah.
And I think it's, as you said, it's the precedent that's being set. That was something that I followed really closely, and I knew of you prior to that through hunting and shooting, and your name's come up from time to time over the years. But I was really impressed with how hard you went on that particular issue, and it's something that I've chatted on this show about with a number of my guests, because it was really quite concerning to me that legislation was able to be rammed through, or legislation, whatever, the decision, let's call it, with no real science behind it.
Yeah.
And I think the minister admitted to you in that estimates hearing that it was an emotional decision.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And I did go hard, and the minister probably didn't talk to me for the next 6 months because of how hard I went. But so be it. That's what I'm here to do. And the problem thing is, it wasn't a piece of legislation that would come before the House. It was essentially a regulation which sort of sits below ledge, and there is very little scrutiny on that. We have the power to disallow regulations in our House. But it's rare and it's pretty hard to do. And so I would have needed to get all the opposition and most of the crossbench across the line to try and disallow a reg like that. And that wasn't going to happen because the opposition were in lockstep with the government on it. Because everyone was caught up in the cute and fuzziness
because they'd anthropomorphise
the animal,
called him Gus or something. Which is quite amazing that they were able to identify an individual blue groper, because in my experience, under the water, there's generally more than one of them in a particular reef system. So
well, we were up at a spearfishing comp recently, a few months back up at Nora Head, and the guys were just saying there was just loads of them.
Oh yeah,
under the water.
Well, that's my local up there on the Central Coast, and every time I put a mask on, the things are bumping into you. They're pretty prevalent.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem with that is that they're being hand reared by the scuba divers. They'll break off.
Feed the merchants and stuff.
And that's not. You might enjoy doing that, but that's not a natural process, and then you can't then use that to try and say, oh, they should be protected because they come in and.
They're friendly
and they're gentle. It's like, well, no, they're actually a bit of an arsehole of a fish.
Great white's friendly too until it bites you.
But they'll go after it. They'll push other species out. They're territorial on their own. There's that old joke. Well, Kiwis go, we've got a better snapper fishery than you. It's like, well, hang on, we'll send over our gropers and see how you go.
And they do have they can have a negative impact on reef systems. Correct. Yeah. So for anyone that doesn't know what we're talking about here. This is an issue that occurred, was it last year? I think it was last year.
Yeah, I think it was last year.
Yeah, so
spear fisherman illegally speared a blue groper,
Yeah.
which has been illegal to shoot a blue groper with a spear gun since what, the 70s?
something like that.
So he broke the law, and then the minister for the DPI, is that
Yeah.
right? Pushed through a regulation saying that they can't be targeted with
line.
rod and reel.
Yeah.
So completely irrelevant to the issue at hand.
Yeah.
But basically, from what I could see, it was an emotional decision based on what, the media.
Media, pressure from the animal rights movement, and I guess that's where, our side of politics and culture doesn't do well in terms of rallying behind causes that are important to us.
Well, if you can't get fishos to align around a particular species, non-fishos and
Yeah.
non-hunters are definitely not
Yeah.
there, because they're going to go either I don't care or yeah, good. It doesn't
Yeah.
affect them, right?
Yeah, that's right. And the frustrating thing is on the other side, the Greens and the animal rights movement, they don't care what the issue is. If it's largely aligned with their views, they'll just jump in and support. Whereas we seem to sort of, split ourselves into individual little tribes, and it's frustrating.
It must be frustrating for you with a party that sits across a number of outdoor recreation pursuits, because I know it frustrates the hell out of me.
Yeah.
Trying to get a rock climber to care about four-wheel drive access, or a four-wheel driver to care about hunting access.
Yeah.
And they go, I don't care.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like,
it is.
yeah, but it's all connected.
Yeah, that's right.
It's all connected.
And this sort of idea that because I do it a certain way, I'm somehow better than the person that does it a different way. That's not helpful.
Yeah. So with the blue groper, it's quite an interesting one, because I can't remember the specific wording, but it was basically they can't be targeted. Is that the way it was positioned?
I think that was the wording in all the media was that way, but the regulations said they couldn't be taken.
Right.
Which for me creates a bit of a legal conundrum, because you can accidentally hook these things. You might be targeting something else, and they'll have a crack at it.
I've definitely hooked them while fishing for drummer. It's usually over very quickly. But so is catch and release fishing okay then?
Well, that's a $64 million question. The department claim that it's okay. You just can't keep them.
Yes.
But for me, there was concerns around the wording of the regulation, because it refers to things being caught.
So it's quite ambiguous.
Yeah, and it's like the problem with that is, it's you're going to have to go through the process of having an argument in court, to dispute it, and then the process becomes a punishment.
Yes.
Which is not ideal.
Yeah, well, it's time and money, right?
It's time and money.
We all don't have enough of. Yeah.
No, and you see that in the four-wheel drive sector too, with modified vehicles. Just last night I was up on my feet talking about that very issue about, guys getting pulled over by the side of the road and being drilled by a cop for an hour, because the cop has a bit of an attitudinal dysfunction and doesn't agree with the engineer's report. It's like, well,
I recently had an engineered vehicle red stickered by a highway patrol officer, and when I presented the engineer's certificate, he said he didn't care. So it's pretty frustrating when you go through the time, the effort, and the money, and it's
absolutely
not an insignificant cost to engineer the vehicle. And
and
someone who's unqualified says, "No, I don't believe that."
Yeah, and what does that say to the the guy that's got 20 years worth of mechanical engineering, behind him, and has put all that time, to do the work, get it all certified. It's not a small thing. It's not just we'll whack a lift kit on and it should be right, mate. Like it's
no, there's heaps of testing.
Yeah, swerve testing, brake testing, whole heap of stuff.
Yeah, well, I just got one of my vehicles engineered, and it was probably, I think I spent $6,000 on top of all the modifications by the time I was done and dusted to get it fully engineered.
Yeah.
And when I asked one of the transport inspectors, if I get pulled over, does this cover me? And he's like, I can't comment on what highway patrol do.
Yeah.
You kind of go, oh, righto.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a broken system in that regard.
Yeah, it is. And that's, I guess, what I was sort of up on my feet talking about last night, just saying, like, we've got to do better here. Like, you've got people that are actually doing the right thing, going through the right process, and you punish them for obeying the law. What's that going to encourage?
Well, anecdotally from the community that I move in, it says, well, why bother spending the money to engineer the car? Just run the gauntlet, because the end result will be the same.
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
isn't ideal because then you do have unsafe vehicles on the road. You know?
Yeah, that's right. And that was the sort of same vibe I was getting from people around the blue groper issue. Is they were just like, well, why am I paying my fishing fees? If all I'm getting is lockouts, if all I'm getting is restrictions and more rules, I'm not seeing the investment from the trust funds back into my
which was
pastime.
I mean, I remember when the recreational fishing fee was introduced, and that was the rhetoric, right? This will improve recreational fishing opportunities for people in New South Wales.
Yeah, greater research, greater infrastructure, all this stuff. And now you've got like 48% of the money going into offset staffing costs in DPI.
Hard to swallow.
It is, and they've done it by snaffling a lot of the trust fund projects and saying, oh, we'll manage this, and it's just, essentially they're using it to supplement their income.
And I mean, there are, so the FAD program, that's run by New South Wales Fisheries, is that correct? So that's under the DPI?
Yeah.
So there are some positive things.
Yeah, look, they are.
Yeah.
There are some good programs, but there are some ones that are questionable. And we've come across some instances where people are, staff within DPI actually being charged against a project when we know they're not actually working on that project, have never worked on that project, and it's just like, hang on, you're taking the piss here.
Yeah, and with the groper, I think that was probably, as I said, it was something I took a really keen interest in, but there was very little scientific data used to make that decision.
No.
And then at the end of I believe it was a 12-month period, then some data was presented and it was fish traps baited with pilchards, and they say, there were no groper there. It's like, well, funny that.
Yeah, and it wasn't even a specific study for blue groper. It was like an anecdotal thing that they'd already done, and then they sort of retrospectively went back and went, how many groper did we see? And then they published it in a CSIRO journal to think that would give them some cred. But any scientist can publish in a CSIRO journal. It's not some sort of elite thing that means that report has any standing.
Yeah.
And a lot of CSIRO scientists have come to me afterwards and said that report was shit. We don't recognise it.
Well, some of the findings were pretty weird as well. It was about increases in sea surface temperatures and groper moving south into inshore reefs. It's kind of like, well, that doesn't say anything about the biomass, right?
No, it's a natural thing. If the environment that an animal is in changes,
they'll move. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just nature.
Yeah. So where to from here with the blue groper? I mean, is that a done deal now? Is that
It's going to be hard to reverse. Unfortunately, it's not something I'm going to give up on, but it's going to be hard to reverse, particularly given that they've uttered the magic words of climate change. That's what should be sending shivers down people's spines, because what fish species or animal are they going to target next, or any outdoor recreation are they going to target next, uttering those magic words that no one seems to want to be able to dispute.
Yeah, and it's not lost on me that when we talk national parks, it's under DCC EEW, it's the Department of Climate Change.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's funny because, we've got that department responsible for national parks, but then also renewable energy and clearing huge amounts of land in national parks to build wind turbines. And I kind of go, how are these not conflicting priorities?
Yeah, that's right. It's something I've struggled with as well. And that's, I guess, another inquiry I'm running into is the impact of, the renewable energy zones across the state. And, my view is every technology has a cost, and we just got to be honest about what that cost is. And I don't think we are being honest about the cost of renewable energy. There is an environmental cost. Let's be honest about it.
There has to be, right?
Yeah. And don't ignore the costs from overseas too, in terms of the production. Where's the materials coming from?
Well, I wonder this when we talk about forestry, right?
Yeah.
There's a huge movement around the Great Koala National Park and ending native hardwood logging in Australia. And my first question is, cool, so where do we get the timber from?
We get it from Malaysia, where they have less rules around environmental protections. So it's purely Chardonnay socialism.
It's really not in my backyard stuff.
Yeah. I don't care about the orangutans, So Yeah, it's frustrating.
Hard to swallow again.
It is, and we have some of the highest standards in terms of native forest harvesting laws, and it's not clear fell logging, it's selective harvesting. If you go and look at the maps that these guys have in their trucks, every tree is marked on the map, every zone.
They're not just going in there and chopping everything down.
It's very selective, and there's certain paths they've got to take, to avoid certain trees, and it's all earmarked, and it's frustrating. A lot of the rule changes that get thrust upon them at the last minute, and then they get the shit kicked out of them. They might have a mistake and don't comply with the law that came down the night before. It's really frustrating.
And I think there's a human element to it as well, right? Like a lot of those guys involved in forestry, it's generational, right?
Yeah.
They come from a family of foresters.
Yeah, absolutely. And they love being out in the bush. Like I've been out there on sites with them, and they're just, they know more about the bush than, most of the numpties in the Department of Energy and Climate Change will ever know. Because they live and breathe it.
Yeah, and I guess that's a hard one across the outdoor recreation community, right? And I know for four-wheel drivers, like we're seen as like the big bad, diesel burning, trashing tracks. But my argument to that is that now there are exceptions to this in every community. Of course, you get your bad apples, but we're all conservationists because we enjoy spending time in the bush. So we don't want to destroy it because then we wouldn't have the enjoyment of going there. So
that's right. And we're also our own regulators when we see or hear of someone doing their own thing in terms of leaving campsites trashed and stuff like that. We get up our own community. We sort of self-regulate and go, hey guys, that's not cool. Same with the hunting fraternity, same with the fishing fraternity. It's the same.
And it's just unfortunate that there are some, I guess, bad apples in all communities, right? Regardless of whether it's outdoor recreation or any other pursuit.
But you don't throw out, you don't wreck and trash that whole community or ban that whole community, for one or two bad eggs.
Well, you look at like the Greens, right? Like there are some militant greenies that do the wrong thing and break laws, but that doesn't mean that we ban the Greens it's kind of that same.
Can't we?
I'd love to, but unfortunately, that is frowned upon.
Yeah.
But it is frustrating, and I think at the moment in the outdoor recreation communities that I participate in, feels like we're being attacked from all angles.
Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah.
And I've had conversations around campfires, and I've had conversations on this show about it, and people say, well, I like fishing, I like hunting, and I like four-wheel driving, and I'm being restricted in all of those three things, and what's the end game? And one thing that keeps getting brought up, and I'm keen to hear your sort of perspective on it, is the 30 by 30 agenda. So some people say, you bring it up and they say, you're a conspiracy theorist, but it's published.
Yeah.
It's available.
Yeah.
So what's the go with that? Because that's something that we've signed on to at a federal level, is that correct?
Signed up to on a federal level. I've never really debated in any sense as to whether we should or we shouldn't sign up to it. Certainly no, I guess, consultation at a state level, from my understanding, and essentially binds us to reach certain targets.
That was Plibisek that signed up to that, wasn't it?
I'd have to double check. It's been a while, but it signs us up to achieve certain targets in terms of environmental protections, etc. So X amount of waters, locked up in marine protected areas by 2030. Same with national parks, and I guess it's for those that are environmentally minded. They might go, well, that's something to aspire to. It's something good, but it's like, well, if you're just locking it up and you're not managing it, what are you really protecting? What are you really conserving? Some of these national parks that you go in, they're not exemplars of pristine wilderness.
Noxious weeds and feral animals.
Weeds and feral animals. Highly susceptible to bushfires. What have you protected, conserved? When you lose, hectares and hectares, through a bushfire.
So I guess this is an interesting. We sort of come full circle, but that's a national decision that impacts obviously all of the states.
Yeah.
but then the state public land is managed at a state level.
Yeah.
So how does that work? Like, I think at the moment, is it about 10% of New South Wales is national park? Or under national parks management?
Look, that sounds about right.
So to get that from 10 to 30, who's paying for it? Who's buying the land? Where's the land coming from?
That's the thing. The taxpayer's paying for it, essentially. National Park will purchase the land, and then it's got to be gazetted or essentially legislated to become a national park. Huge swathes of land were bought by the last government towards the end there, like millions and millions of hectares out west, out Burke Way. And I know some of the rangers out there put their head in their hands and just in frustration and said, well, we don't have the resources to manage what we've got, and you're giving us, another couple 100,000 hectares of, land to manage. Which brings me back to the question, what's the point of, locking it up if it's not being looked after, not being managed, and
just waiting to burn, right?
Just waiting to burn, and you can't manage our landscape without being in it and being amongst it.
Without a bit of fire.
Without a bit of fire, yeah. That's it.
It's quite fascinating. It's a bit scary, really, when I think about, we're fighting for access at the moment with what we've got, and then we're talking about more land being locked up. And even in the last 10 years, I can list Merrilla State Forest, Jalore State Forest, the Nerns Plateau, like all this land that was state forest that we could hunt legally under restricted game licence, we could four-wheel drive in it, and now it's been handed to national parks. It's been locked up. It's been gated. Yeah, and you just don't go there.
Yeah, and that's the frustrating thing from the foresters, the harvesters' perspective. They manage that state forest, carefully. Selective harvesting. They get it to a point where it is pristine, because each tree needs a certain, depending on the species, needs a certain space around it to grow to its full potential. Yeah. So, people think a thick forest is somehow healthy. It's not. So state forest, management gets it to a certain point, and it is great. It is an exemplar of what a forest should look like, and then national parks come in and goes, oh, that looks nice, I'll take that. And then
it gets overtaken with lantana, blackberry, scotch broom, and everything else.
Because they throw a fence and a gate around it, and then walk away because they don't have the resources to manage it. And it's just like coming back to the issue of what's the point of ticking a box, with the UN to say it's
protected.
It's protected when what we're protecting in there isn't really worth protecting.
Yeah, and I mean, the hunting thing in national parks, before we started filming, we're talking about that very issue, and it's interesting with the petition that I raised when I mentioned hunting. I had a number of people calling me a psychopath and a redneck and a bogan and every other name under the sun, and saying, we don't want people shooting guns in national parks. I hike in there, and I did a bit of research and said, well, under the State Forest Restricted Game Licence, which has been in place for, I believe, about 20 years, no one has been shot.
No,
not one person has been shot. So that's a moot point.
Yeah.
And there's this sort of mentality, I guess, amongst the wider community that we're like gun-toting rednecks that are shooting at everything that moves. But in my experience, all my mates that shoot and hunt are highly focused on safety.
Yeah.
And apart from anything else, they don't want to be anywhere near people hiking or riding dirt bikes because the game's not there anyway.
No, right? Exactly. You have a noisy hiker walking through with their Pomeranian, yakking away. The deer and the pigs and the goats or whatever, they're not going to be anywhere near that.
We want to be far away in the gnarliest gullies that are really difficult to get to, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. That's the joy. That's part of the joy of actually getting out in the bush, is finding those choice spots.
Yeah, absolutely. It's So with the 30 by 30 agenda, when the matter of public interest was raised in this place recently, I think one of the Greens members actually got up and said, "Oh no, we shouldn't be letting people access these areas. We should be locking more of it up." And one of the other members said, "Well, that's great, but are you aware it's 2025 and that's only 5 years away? How are we going to fund this?"
Yeah,
it's a serious question. I mean, how we can sign up to an agreement, but where's the reality intersect with that?
Yeah, it doesn't.
So I'm guessing it's private land, or is it state forest?
Look, in some of the cases of the recent purchases, it's been private land.
There was a bit of that out west recently, wasn't there? I saw the Environment Minister was celebrating buying a whole bunch of, well, I guess it was cattle stations.
Yeah, old clapped out cattle stations. Like I've driven out there, and you've got feral goats and stuff.
A lot of red dirt.
A lot of red dirt. You know, what are we protecting out there? What are we conserving? You know, and why can't we manage? Why can't we manage the pests differently out there? It's not the Royal National Park we're talking about here. It's something with low visitation.
Yeah, I mean the vast majority of people that live in the bounds of this city probably don't want to go there.
No.
I love it out there. I think it's great. But
Yeah.
the vast majority of people go, why the hell would you go out there?
Yeah, but also a large majority of the people that live out there aren't big fans of national parks either. They don't rate them as good neighbours, purely because of that issue of management of pests and management of weeds, and and fire risks.
Well, I've got a number of mates that are farmers and that own property that has a boundary with the national park.
Yeah.
And when I ask them where the deer come from or where the pigs come from, they just point up the hill.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's hard for them when they're trying to manage their own land that they own, and they've got this constant influx of pest animals that they then need to pay to manage.
Yeah.
But I can't walk in there and go and help them.
Yeah.
I've got to wait for them to cross the boundary, right?
Yeah, it's frustrating.
Yeah. So, I mean, what do you see in terms of the future looking like with that national parks access and state forests? I know you've recently got a committee up, an inquiry into public land access across New South Wales, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And I know a lot of the outdoor rec communities are really interested to see what that process looks like in terms of the opportunity for public submissions. So now that committee has been voted up, is that correct?
Yep.
So where to from here? What does it mean?
All right, so we just had our first meeting of it the other day. So submissions are live, so people can jump on the website, and they've got till 1st of August to put in a written submission about their concerns or issues with access to public land. And it could be about national parks, it could be about state forests, it could be about a whole range of things. I've sort of deliberately kept it fairly broad and open.
Very broad, yeah.
And part of that was to try and capture everything, and part of that was also to make it amenable to all sides of politics, so there couldn't be that pushback that I was specifically targeting national parks or specifically targeting hunting. I want it to be as broad as possible, so we could get it up. So people have got to the 1st of August to give a submission. Generally, I accept late submissions anyway, so if people email me and say, "Hey, Mark, I haven't been able to get in time," I'll generally wave it through. And then we'll probably hold public hearings, try and get out into the regions and look at specific issues. Everyone will probably want to take us to their favourite locked gate.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's going to be a challenging one to manage, because there's a lot of locked gates, a lot of soft closures. Of national parks and other areas, but and then I guess from there we'll have those site visits, we'll have those hearing days, and then the committee will produce a report basically with findings and recommendations around what we've heard, what we can potentially change, and those recommendations go to the government, and they've got 3 months to respond.
In the upper house? Or in the lower house?
It just essentially gets sent to the whole government, as a whole of government. The Environment Minister's in our place, and the Minister in charge of State Forests is in our place, but then you've got Crown Land Minister is in the other place. So it's looking at all public land. Okay. And one thing I've found, it's been 6 years in this place, and looking at individual access issues with constituents, is there's a lot of what the departments call orphaned assets. So they've got these parcels of land on their books that half the time they don't even realise they own it. And until an access issue is raised, it just sort of...
I think you mentioned that in the MPI when it was debated,
Sits in fairyland. There's been so many examples of that, like just recently I've been dealing with issue in the Sydney metro area of a fishing club where they've been operating on this piece of land for ages. The council wants to kick them out, for some unknown reason. Everyone thought it was Crown land. We looked at all the maps with the minister, and turns out it's actually Sydney Water land, and Sydney Water didn't even realise they owned it, has owned it for 70 years, doesn't really want it, and now we're going through this process of actually trying to get it transferred back to Crown land so then we can secure, the fishing club's access there. So it's things like that where we have the potential to maybe open up, a whole range of different parcels of land. And just maybe even just smooth out the process in terms of how those access issues are resolved.
And I think that's the frustrating part for the community. And obviously, I don't speak on behalf of everyone, but just from the conversations that I've had, it's the lack of transparency.
Yep.
And then when there's stakeholder engagement or community consultation, those two terms are almost meaningless in a lot of cases, because people will put forward submissions, and with the Gardens of Stone National Park, that was a fantastic example where I personally know a number of people that put in submissions around that, and what was promised in terms of four-wheel drive access and what's come out in the management plan are completely different, and it's almost like, it's not almost like, those submissions have been completely ignored. And I guess that's the frustrating part. Trying to get someone to actually get off their ass and put a submission in is hard enough. But then when it's ignored, it's sort of, I told you it was pointless. And it's hard to keep people motivated and hungry to fight.
100%. And I've seen it myself, and I remember I had this conversation with a Liberal Party member in the last Parliament, and I was talking about that very point, and he said, Mark, consultation doesn't mean we need to actually do what the people say. We just need to pretend to listen. You
just have to give them the opportunity to say something.
It's just like, well, sort of defeats the purpose. You're seeking feedback, and because the feedback's not what you want, you just ignore it. And
noted and ignored, right?
Noted and ignored. It's just like, well, you've actually spent a lot of money in doing a consultation. What's the point? If you're just going to ignore it, and if it's not representative of what people, think or view should be done, well, why are you doing it?
And it is frustrating because it's public land at the end of the day.
We're all public land owners. I've said it a few times. We all might use that land for different things. Like, it's so many different uses of public land. Forward driving, fishing, hunting. Apiarists, mushroom pickers,
prospectors.
And I respect all of those people being able to get out there and use it. It's fantastic. But there is a reality that these outdoor pursuits are growing in popularity, and we need to cater for that. We keep locking up land. You're going to push all those different groups into the same areas, and that's when you are going to have conflict.
And more pressure on the natural environment.
More pressure on the natural environment.
So with the committee that's been formed, who's on that committee? Obviously, you're the chair, is that correct? So who else is involved in that?
All right, so I'm the chair. Jeremy Buckingham from Legalised Cannabis is my deputy chair. He seems to have a special interest in mushroom picking. No judgment there. You've got, I think, 2 or 3 from the government, Labor. Scott Barrett from the Nationals, who also spoke on the MPI. I think one from the Liberal Party, and Sue Higginson from the Greens. So it's an eclectic bunch.
Be some rather heated debates, I'm sure, with that group of members.
Or certainly one of them. You probably would have seen how she tried to characterise the MPI and even characterise my motivations for putting up this select committee. She basically called us all a bunch of racist rednecks, and and how we'll somehow disrespecting Aboriginal people.
That wasn't lost on me. That and I find that as soon as a Green or a lefty starts calling you racist, it means you've got them. You've got them under pressure, right?
You got them pegged. They don't have actually a legitimate argument. And it was just, it was actually frustrating for me because that wasn't the motivation at all. It was, as I said, quite broad, open to anyone, And as I said, I was happy for anyone to be on the committee. Anyone still can be on the committee. People other members can jump in and participate and have their say. That's fine.
So those submissions are live now?
Yep.
Is that right? So
Yep.
is that on the Legislative Council website?
Legislative Council website. We can probably drop the link in there.
Yeah, I'll dig it out and I'll add the link in the description of the video and on Spotify as well. So what's the sort of time frame for this?
There is no set reporting date at the moment, and I kind of like it that way. It gives you the flexibility of just being able to let the inquiry flow and go where the evidence takes us. And if you set a reporting date, then you're kind of locked into doing that, and then it becomes rushed and shallow and not very well considered. And then if you want to extend the reporting date, you've got to go back to the House and essentially go through another vote of doing it. And so for big inquiries like this, I just keep it open. And that doesn't stop us producing interim reports in the meantime. We can sort of 6 months or 3 months down the track, we just say, this is what we found so far. This is some prelim recommendations that we think the government should look at. And then we can keep the inquiry going. So, obviously the aim is we've got to report before the end of this term of Parliament.
And when's that?
That's, essentially we go into election mode at the end of November 2026. Okay. So our last sort of sitting weeks are around end of November. So you got to give the government 3 months to respond. So you really want to sort of push, go back 3 months.
Call it August, and so it's maybe a bit over 12 months.
At the very latest,
Yeah. And in terms of the public submissions, what should people be including in that? Like, is there stuff that is more valuable or less valuable, or is there things that get ignored, or what's the sort of process there? Because there's one currently open around national park camping fees that's been getting a lot of attention, particularly in social media circles. And I've had people asking me saying, well, what should I write in the submission? And I don't really know how to answer that. Now, I've put my submission in and basically said, please stop charging us to access public land when we already pay national parks fees.
And please stop charging me $6 for a booking fee for a free campsite.
Ludicrous. And, saying, oh, well, this one's popular, so you need to pay more. And the whole thing is pretty cooked. I stopped paying national park pass fees many years ago because they didn't cover the Alpine National Park and they didn't cover this national park, and then land that I was accessing was getting locked up, and I'm like, am I paying for these gates? And it got to the point similar to the fishing license thing where the community starts saying, well, why am I paying for this? Because I'm paying and I'm losing access, or I'm having to pay more. What is the process in terms of submissions? Is there particular things that people should be taking into consideration?
I guess first and foremost, I'd probably say length. We have a standing rule with submissions now to get around getting smashed with pro formas. We say anything above 250 words won't be treated as a pro forma, and anything below that, they'll still be taken into consideration, but they'll all be collated in under one document as essentially pro formas or short form submissions. So I'd say aim for more than 250 words, which is not hard.
No.
You start talking about your own personal experiences of being locked out. There's 250 words there, right there. So, I'd be talking about those things. I'd say bring in the stuff about camp fees, because that's a restriction on access. When you're looking at camping with your family, and you look at some of these fees that are being proposed, you might as well just go to an Airbnb.
100%.
And it's like, well, it's making camping an unaffordable activity for the average.
Which it shouldn't be.
No.
The beauty of camping is that it is accessible.
Yeah.
It is affordable for families. Not everyone can afford to go to Europe, but you can afford to go camping.
Yeah, that's right.
But in some cases, not if some of these fees get pushed through.
No, that's right. And I sometimes joke about how some of us do go overboard in terms of what we take camping, and we all get a bit carried away with guilty, and you sort of say you're paying thousands of dollars to live like a homeless person.
I have a sign that says that in my shed on the wall.
Yeah.
You know, it is ironic, but
Yeah.
absolutely it is accessible for the vast majority of people.
Yeah, it
right?
is. And I think what this booking system in the national parks has done has actually taken away the spirit of what camping and getting out of the bush for me is all about. Is part of that enjoyment of going is finding that spot, whether it's next to a river or it's just nice setting out when you stumble out of your swag in the morning and it's got a nice outlook. It's just that's part of the enjoyment and part of the appeal of doing it. And to then say to someone, well, you got to pay $50 and you got to camp on this imaginary dot on the ground and you can't deviate from that. It's sort of
takes a bit of the romance out of it and a bit of the, I guess, sort of like the impulsive nature of being able to just throw the kids in the car and go out bush and go camping.
Yeah, and I get the argument that if you're coming into camp on a Friday night with angry wives and kids and tired, and you get to a camp that's chockers, that can be a bit of a frustrating thing or a disappointment. But the solution to that is open up more campsites.
Correct.
Yeah.
Or dispersed camping, free camping, call it whatever you want. And I think the frustrating part, and I've experienced this myself, is when you try and book and it's booked out and you drive past said campsite on the date that it's booked out and it's empty.
Yeah.
And then this is it a ghost booking? Is National Park blocking it out? Like, no one knows what the truth is, but it's extremely frustrating.
Yeah, it is.
And then you look at state forests, and I've noticed on social media lately, New South Wales Forestry's been very actively, I guess, taking the piss out of national parks.
Yeah.
And saying, we welcome everyone. Come here, camp wherever you want. Bring your dog, bring your chainsaw. And they're really doing a good job, I think, of marketing themselves and saying, hey, we actually want you to come and visit our forests and look after them.
And you can actually do stuff on our land. You can actually, as you said, bring the dog, bring the chainsaw, have a campfire without too many dramas. If you want to have a spin on a dirt bike, you can do that.
And that's definitely a frustrating part for me. My wife and I are both dog lovers, and the dog's part of the family, right?
Yeah.
So if I say, hey, let's go here, but the dog has to stay or go to the grandparents, my wife's like, what? I'm not going there. Like, why can't the dog come? We've got a little Jack Russell, he's 6 kilos dripping wet. Like, he's not a real big threat to anyone.
No.
But it is frustrating, and I suppose we need to continue to remind ourselves as an outdoor recreation community how lucky we are to have state forests available. And I know for me, as a restricted game licence hunter, being able to hunt public land, you talk to the boys in WA and they're like, we can only dream of that stuff.
Yeah, and this is where that unity thing should come in, because our native forests, our state forests are under threat from the Greens in terms of harvesting timber. And so if you lose that harvesting of timber, we lose our R licence access.
That's right.
And the forest guys get it, the forestry guys get it. I've had that conversation with them. It's just trying to get that message across to the R licence hunters as well. Like we do have a privileged position where we can hunt in these state forests, but if you don't back native forest logging,
We'll lose it.
We'll lose it.
Yeah. So I mentioned it earlier, but it's something that I am keen to get your opinion on or your input on, is the Great Koala National Park. So I'm shaky on the numbers here, but from what I recall, we've got about 140,000 hectares of national park between, I think it's Taree and the border. And the proposal from Labor is to add another 176,000 hectares or something around that. It's close to 180,000 hectares. That's state forest, right? That they want to convert?
Large percentage of that is, state forests. There's a few different models floating around, in the system about how that could be done. Obviously, there's the National Parks Association version, and we probably should distinguish between National Parks New South Wales and then the Not-for-Profit Association, which is essentially the lobby group.
I've been on their website and read some of their papers, and it's scary or alarming at best.
So they want, the bee's knees, full 180 1,000 hectares of it, and then there's other models where you may be able to use existing parcels of of national park that create those wildlife corridors that satisfy, the government's election commitment of a Great Koala National Park. And there's also the cost factor here. The National Parks Association version of the park is probably going to cost $500 million.
Yeah, who's paying?
We are.
Yeah, and who's going to manage it, right?
Who's going to manage it?
So what happens when that whole joint goes up in flames? How are the cute little fluffy koalas? And I'd just like to point out, I have no issue with koalas. I think they're great. But if we don't manage the land once again, and it all burns, then the koalas ain't going to look real flash after that, are they?
No, that's right. And I guess, who's going to pay for it? Who's going to manage it? And we had these conversations when I ran the inquiry into the timber industry, and we actually went out into what was going to be part of the Great Koala National Park with this association. And I put the question, I said, well, how's this going to be managed any different to all the other national parks? And couldn't answer. Just like, well, what's going to make it so special? Or we're just going to slap a sign out the front of it going Great Koala National Park and she'll be right, that'll do.
Again, it feels like a very emotional or emotive issue with no real data or science behind it.
It is. Everyone loves, as you said, everyone, likes the koala. It's an iconic Australian animal. But a lot of people are ignoring some of the science and the realities behind koalas. They go through peaks and troughs in terms of population. When the conditions, like any animal, when the conditions are good, they'll breed up. The problem with koalas, they'll breed up to the point where they'll eat themselves out of house and home. You compare that to a kangaroo, where if times are tough, they've got an inbuilt mechanism to freeze their embryo until they can get to an area where...
Really?
Yeah, it's pretty.
Wow.
It's pretty cool. So they'll put their joey into a sense of stasis sort of until they can get to a better area where they've got good feed and stuff like that. Right. So koalas, they'll just eat themselves out of house and home. And that's where we've had programs in other states where they're actually transplanting koalas out of areas because they're sitting in acacia trees, starving.
Yeah, wow.
So how's that a good outcome? Yeah. So we're ignoring that science.
So how does that work? The government's made an election commitment to do it, but there's no real logical plan in terms of how they're going to enact it.
No, that's the thing. That's what they're dealing with at the moment. How do they fulfil that election commitment with the limited finances that they have? The Treasurer has sort of just announced now that the $80 million that was earmarked for the park is now being stretched out, not over 4 years, but out to 2029. So what does that mean for the park? What does it mean for the decision? What does it mean for the size of the park? There's a lot of questions there.
So that issue's still very live, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it certainly is, and that's not ideal for the workers that are will be impacted by the decision. It's not good for us as outdoor users because we don't know what the settings are going to be. It is very much a live issue, but a worrying one. Yeah,
and I mean, at a personal level, I put in a permit to acquire another firearm yesterday. Yeah. And I sort of had this sort of moment last night where I was sitting on the couch thinking, like, I'm investing more money in firearms. With the way things are going, am I going to have anywhere that I can use these, or is it only going to be private land?
Yeah.
And, seeing what's been going on in WA recently with the challenges the firearms community's faced over there, and, and then you hear some of the UN rhetoric around civilian firearm use, and it really just sort of begs the question, like, what does it look like into the future?
Yeah, look, it's a worry, and I just, part of the reason why we're here is to protect that stuff. Like, what happened in WA happened because you had a government with a majority, an absolute majority. They didn't have to deal with anyone. On that occasion, it was a Labor government. The next occasion, it could be a Liberal government.
Yep.
That's where they draw their power from. When you actually have a crossbench, and you have lots of different small parties, and the government doesn't have the balance of power, that's when things can be stopped and protected. And in terms of firearms, we did that last Parliament in New South Wales. We were staring down the barrel of some pretty awful shit, similar to WA, where cops would come in and to your house and say, I suspect that you're involved in illegal firearm manufacturing because you've got a lathe, you've got some tools lying around, and I want you to help me investigate you. So give me your passwords to your phones, your computers, your laptops. You've got no right to silence.
Orwellian, isn't it?
It was pretty. Yeah, it was, and we sort of ran a pretty strong campaign against that, and we got the bill kicked to an inquiry, and we were able to prove that convince others that the bill was so bad that the bill never saw the light of day. Essentially died in the lower house and never even got to us. It was that bad. Even David Shubich from the Greens said this was a step too far. So
that's a telling indictment, isn't it?
So I guess that's the power of the upper house, but also the power of having parties like ourselves here protecting, our culture in terms of outdoor recreation and pursuit. So without us, the situation in New South Wales could be like WA.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a number of instances. I can't remember the exact timing, but I know there was a ban that was tried. I think they tried to push through on Christmas Eve or something around the Adler B230, so the bolt action shotgun, which I own, and that got shut down very quickly. But it was really quite telling that they tried to slide that one through when everyone's on holidays and potentially not paying attention.
Yeah, they like to do that. That Christmas time period, the journos are asleep. Most people are more worried about getting the Chrissy Prezzies bored and all.
Or being out there and actually living life in the bush, right?
Yeah, that's right. So they use those sort of opportunities to try and sneak things through, and that's, I guess, why we're here, is to sort of be the watcher on the wall.
Yeah, and I think what you just said about the importance of having some of those minor parties is really important. Particularly when we talk about what are niche communities, right? Like the hunting community is a niche, whether we like it or not. And when you're immersed in the hunting community, you might think, everyone understands this, but the vast majority of people don't.
No, and I was having this conversation with my colleagues the other day, and I said, you can't, no matter how good you are with your words, in terms of writing or speaking, you can't necessarily put it into words what it is to hunt, and the experience of it, and you really, until you do it, and you have that moment where you've done the stalk, you've sat off a choice spot for hours and hours waiting for the animal to come in. You've done everything in the background beforehand to get things right for just that one moment where you may have that opportunity.
Yeah, take an animal.
Take an animal, and then you do, and then there's that, you're walking up to that animal, and there's that reverence and respect, for where you are in that moment.
Yeah.
And it's just, like, I'm not even doing it justice in how I'm saying it now. It's just, it's hard to describe. Like,
you can't explain it.
You can't explain it to someone. They just got to do it, and immerse themselves in it. Once you generally, I found you do, like, you just don't go back. You can't look at things the same way again.
Yeah, it's very rare that I can't think of an example where I've met someone who hunted for a bit and then stopped.
Yeah.
It's something that you generally do as long as you're able, physically able, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So probably a good segue, and the last thing I wanted to get your input in is something that I've seen you guys pushing quite heavily lately, which is the conservation hunting bill. So Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so look, I guess we already have public land hunting in New South Wales. We've been doing it for over 20 years, safely, no issues. I guess what we've come and battled with over that time period is this perception that recreational hunters can't be part of the broader conversation and strategy around pest management from a government perspective. Local land services over the years has been particularly adverse to having those conversations with us and wanting us to be recognised and acknowledged as part of that. So that's, I guess, where part of the bill came from, in trying to change that paradigm and say, hey, look, we're not the panacea, but we are part of the solution, and we can contribute, and we are a free resource in what we do, and we could contribute millions of dollars to the economy. Like we're like the second or third largest primary industry in terms of contribution to the economy. So we well and truly punch.
Well, guns ain't cheap.
No, that's right.
Scopes aren't cheap.
That's
Ammo's
right.
not cheap. So
Yeah, and I guess it also goes back to that notion of it's growing in popularity. So there's more of us that could be utilised, and there are also pockets of land where the pest animals aren't being managed well, or aren't being managed at all. Some of them are sort of peri-urban areas. There might be small discrete blocks, small parcels of Crown land that aren't possibly being utilised, that could be potentially be utilised for hunting. So it was about setting up a process where those lands could be identified and assessed as to whether they can be added to, I guess, the land that we can hunt in. So essentially growing the access is probably the major component of the bill. I guess the other part is setting up a structure or a board that is better placed to represent hunters in that space. We've had boards before, and it's been largely stacked with people that don't get hunting, don't do it, don't understand it, and we really wanted to bring in a strong education piece and a strong promotional piece back into that space, because DPI Fisheries does a decent job in terms of promoting fishing as a pastime, but DPI hunting, when it was first set up, wasn't allowed to.
Really?
Yeah, it was sort of restricted from, we can't be seen to be promoting hunting. And it's sort of like, well, why? It's a legal pastime. You've got an agency dedicated to regulating it.
And we're not out there shooting native animals.
We're not out there shooting native animals. Why can't we promote it? And you can promote it through education about how you do it safely, blah, 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 blah. That's fine, but it wasn't getting done. So part of this bill will actually change that and funnel the licence fees more towards that side of things. So greater education, greater promotion, greater engagement with our hunting clubs around the state, getting the hunting clubs in that paradigm of actually being part of the solution as well. There's a lot of these lands that could be identified and that are in peri-urban areas that could be then passed to clubs to manage, in terms of a pest management plan for landholders. So it's essentially creating a structure to do all that. And is it everything we want? No.
Never is, right?
It never is. Will we come back and ask for more? Yes. That's, I think, a lot of questions have been put to us about, well, why did you not mention national parks, or why did you say it's not going to include national parks? It's like, well, politics is the art of the possible. You go for what you know you can get, and then you come back and say, thank you, now I want some more.
Yes.
And that's what we're doing.
All right. Apologies for the technical difficulties there, but the camera decided to overheat in an air-conditioned office, which is always good. So where to now with the hunting bill then?
Right, so we were looking to finish debating it this week. Unfortunately, there were some dirty tricks played in politics, as always happens. The Greens rallied a few anti-hunting and anti-firearm groups to come in and guilt some of the other parties into trying to kick it to an inquiry, and they were successful in doing that by one vote. So it's now going to our State Development Committee, and it will report back before we return to Parliament in about 5-6 weeks. Okay. So I guess the message out there for our guys is to smash the inquiry with submissions talking about the benefits of it and why it should go ahead, and the success of obviously the state forest hunting program that we already have, and highlighting that it's safe, it's successful, and it's just a continuation and an improvement on that process.
Beautiful,
So,
mate. Well, look, Mark, I truly thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been educational for me and insightful, and hopefully it is for the audience as well. So, yeah, thank you, mate.
no problems, anytime.
Cheers.
Cheers.
And we will see all of you next time on the outer side.